Welcome to Stay Home, Stay Focused. I'm Jack Moline. I'm the president of Interfaith Alliance. And my guest today is my friend Catherine Orsborn from Shoulder to Shoulder. Catherine, before I start asking you all sorts of official stuff, let's start with the important stuff. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm grateful for so many blessings in this time. And, I have some challenges with a 2-year-old and a 7-month-old at home, trying to to get work done and all of those sorts of things. But I, have it really good in many ways, and I'm grateful for that. And before we get into the other stuff, want to just say thank you so much for having me on here and for the work that Interfaith Alliance does.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, and thanks for the endorsement. So before we get to the official stuff, how are you keeping yourself focused during this time when obviously your first concern is for family?
Yeah, I mean, it's a daily thing, a daily commitment. I think to really taking the moments that I can find to sort of check in with myself, and to check in with sort of the people around me, taking myself outside of the daily sort of concerns of home, of family, of children, and really thinking about what's going on beyond our home as well, which I think can be challenging to do in these times. But really just taking those few moments to check in with myself and with the world around me, I think has been a really important grounding thing for me on a daily basis.
Good for you. So now we get down to business a little bit. Here we are, a Jew and a Christian, talking about Muslims.
Yes.
So
Here we are.
Why don't you tell me what Shoulder to Shoulder is?
Yeah. So Shoulder to Shoulder is it's a coalition-based campaign of 34 different national religious denominations, primarily not Muslim organizations and groups, as well as over 60 local affiliated groups that we work with, that are all committed to a multi-faith stance or work together against anti-Muslim bias, really as part of the broader work of advancing American ideals equally for everyone in this country. So Shoulder to Shoulder really has a focus on the issue of anti-Muslim discrimination, but our focus really is about calling non-Muslims into this work and being good allies in that way against anti-Muslim discrimination, not leaving it to our Muslim neighbors to sort of stand up against bias and discrimination alone.
And how long has Shoulder to Shoulder been around?
We are celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. And I say celebrating sort of tongue in cheek. We wished we weren't still having to do this work, honestly. It's a coalition that would like to work itself out of existence if the need for us were to disappear. Unfortunately, we're still dealing with anti-Muslim discrimination, but I will say that over the last 10 years of our work, I think we've made a lot of strides in creating these networks of people that are really committed to this and building a lot of relationships between communities, individuals, organizations across the country. So I think we're in a different place in the sort of infrastructure than we were 10 years ago, while of course we're still dealing with lots of bias rhetoric and discriminatory legislation and everything else.
So I think it's important. You keep saying 10 years, and that's a very important number. Everyone can do the math and understand that Shoulder to Shoulder has not been a response to the current administration.
Correct.
It is a response to something that was identified in the broader American culture at a time when we might have thought things might have been more open and accepting.
Yes.
But it was not just anti-Muslim bias filtered into society in general. There were things in government that those of us who were involved in Shoulder to Shoulder were concerned about when the organization was founded during the Obama administration.
Right, exactly.
How did you come to Shoulder, Catherine?
Yeah, so my path to Shoulder was a little bit meandering. I think in many ways it starts with my experiences as a evangelical college student studying abroad in Egypt and having my own sort of worldview and my own faith challenged in many ways that caused me to kind of go on a quest for understanding who I am as a person of faith in this world, as well as a citizen of this country, and coming from a community where the views around Muslims and Islam were not extremely positive. And coming back from Egypt to that community, I did my graduate work in religious studies with a focus on Islamic studies and multi-faith relations. Religion and social change specifically was the program that I was in. And while I was in that program, I really started to think about how I wanted to apply the work I was doing, not just in a strictly academic space, but really in a space that made a difference on how we think about pluralism here in the United States. And going beyond the work I was doing on examining conflicts in other countries around how religion sort of played into certain conflicts in other countries, I started to actually look around me a little bit more closely and realize that I had a calling to be involved in work here to advance our own ideals at home.
I'd love to spend an hour unpacking what took you to Egypt and brought you back. But I wonder if you could just share one story, a touchstone story for you about how your time in Egypt had an impact on you.
Sure. There are lots of them, but the one that immediately comes to my mind that I think is salient because it's the month of Ramadan has just started, and I was there during Ramadan in 2005. So this was quite a while ago, fall of 2005, and I was invited into, I was living with a host family, but was invited by another friend who was about my age to come have iftar with her family. And then they insisted that I stay the night and that I get up with them and do suhoor in the morning. And then they finally were like, okay, now we'll take you home at 10 a.m. or something like that, after we had gotten some sleep after our second meal of the night. And mind you, I had been eating all day, so they were just feeding me incessantly. And I have a memory of sitting on the rooftop of their apartment building in Cairo with my friend and some of her siblings who were sitting up there. We're all around at the same age. I think there was one other American who was part of my study abroad program that was there as well. And we were just having these conversations about what God, who God was and what God meant to us. And that, for me, I think I had a strong realization at that point that my friend and I were on a similar quest in certain ways. And it really helped me, something in that conversation really helped me to let go a little bit of my certainty that I had it right, that I understood God and the world correctly. And I sort of had that a moment of shattering in certain ways on that rooftop, and really was able to see things a little bit differently by connecting with somebody who was of a very different faith, a very different upbringing and background from me, but who kind of helped me look at myself a little bit.
It's funny how if we allow challenges to be real to what we believe, they really secure what we really do believe. There's a Jewish teaching, the only whole heart is a broken heart. So that
I love
applies.
that. Yes.
So I'm going to go from the very sweet to the very troubling.
That's this work, right?
There seems to be no end to the issues that are confronting American Muslims.
Yeah.
There's stereotyping, surveillance, traditional clothing, angst about Sharia, travel bans. You name the kind of prejudice that can be leveled against a community, that the American Muslims have received them. And I say that as a public Jew who hears about all the anti-Semitism as well. Why are all of these things directed against American Muslims?
I think the honest answer to that question is because it is buying political points for people. I think the reality is that if anti-Muslim discrimination wasn't politically helpful to certain people, then they would stop. And so I think there's a lot of factors that we could talk about. There's lack of relationship, lack of knowledge about Muslims and Islam. There's challenges with media bias, but I think what it really boils down to is that it's politically expedient for some people. And if that were not the case, then I don't think we would see as much of it.
So that's a far more practical problem than it is a philosophical one.
Right.
So where do we start?
Well, there's a lot of starting points. And one of the things we always do at our shoulder to shoulder trainings, our faith over fear trainings around this issue is to really start with unpacking and contextualizing anti-Muslim bigotry, that there's not, one sort of place to start necessarily. But I think that, an everyday sort of person or a person who has some platform and some leadership ability within communities that are primarily not Muslim, that building knowledge and relationships is a really important place to start. Not because I don't necessarily believe in the idea that if we just have enough individual relationships, that the sum of those is going to combat this issue. But I think it's about building these sort of infrastructures, like social and community sort of infrastructures, to be able to push back against hate, against bigotry, against hate crimes, against bias legislation. If you have these networks and these infrastructures built, which you do through this long, slow work of relationship building, then I think there is an ability for us as communities to sort of resist this stuff that just keeps coming down. So, and I think it's important to be doing that work beyond sort of the so-called choir, that people who have communities that listen to them, that don't necessarily see this issue the same way as them, have a responsibility to be speaking out on that. So whether that's through small groups, through sermons, through op-eds, through just everyday sort of conversations within their spheres of influence, we think that is really an important part of this work.
I was very fortunate to be present at the meeting that gave birth to Shoulder to Shoulder. Mm-hmm. And initially it was conceived as an organization exclusively of non-Muslim representatives.
Right.
It was authorized and sponsored and supported by the Islamic Society of North America. We'll get to that in a minute. Mm-hmm. But for the early years, it was entirely non-Muslim organizations.
Right.
Now there are Muslim organizations who are part of it. What are the pluses and minuses of those two configurations?
Sure. So there are just still a handful of Muslim organizations that are part of the membership of Shoulder to Shoulder, in part because this has always been sort of conceived as an ally organization, an organization that is focused on kind of bringing our own people to the table on this issue, rather than leaning, putting the burden sort of on Muslim organizations. And so that continues to be really important to the work. We have, I think, since the founding, really immersed ourselves in deeper networks and relationships with a variety of Muslim partners, because doing good allyship work, I think, means listening on a very regular basis and in a very deep way to what the affected communities are saying. So I think of Muslim partners, but also people who are perceived to be Muslim in the community, often referred to as MASA, Muslim, Arab, South Asian sort of partners who are often perceived to be Muslim. And we need to be in deep relationship and deep network and listening to those voices to understand the issues and how they're impacting the communities. And, it's complex because those communities and organizations are not always seeing the issues the same way. So the Muslim community and the Muslim, Arab, South Asian communities are as diverse as any community on how they perceive issues. But in being present in many of those conversations and listening, I think we are able to understand better how to be good allies instead of trying to do this work somehow in isolation on the side.
That's a great answer. I think there's probably also an irony in having an organization like this that doesn't allow Muslims into it. So it's just one of those things.
So one of the things on that note that we've been developing just over the last year is a what we're calling a Masa consultative circle for shoulder to shoulder, because we have as I said, a handful of Muslim membership organizations, but then so many of our other Muslim partnerships have been somewhat informal in a certain way. And we have seen that as something we want to address as a challenge as an organization. And it's taken some time to sort of gain some consensus on how we move that piece forward. But we're developing a Masa consultative circle of people that we know and trust, that represent diverse perspectives within the community, to really be involved in Shoulder to Shoulder's leadership in a more formal way. Because I hear that. I do think it has been a challenge.
I think people who are watching and listening to this probably assume that you're working with a massive staff and unlimited resources. It is really remarkable what you do with 2 full-time and 1 part-time staff member. Is that what it is?
Yes, that is correct. We have 2 full-time staff, 1 part-time staff, and we have someone we call a super volunteer who has been doing a lot of work with us on some of the legislative pieces as well. But we're a tiny team, that's for sure.
And you get a lot done.
We
mentioned ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America. Tell us just a few words about them and what the relationship is between the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign and ISNA.
Sure. So ISNA was a founding partner of Shoulder to Shoulder when various Christian and Jewish groups at the founding of Shoulder to Shoulder had a desire to show up in a more robust interfaith way on this issue. They came to ISNA and sort of asked for advice and what it could look like to come together. And so ISNA was in some ways the incubator of Shoulder to Shoulder. They have, since the founding of Shoulder to Shoulder, been the hosting organization for the campaign. So the campaign has its own leadership and its own fundraising and all of those sorts of pieces, but it's housed at ISNA as a fiscal sponsor of the campaign. And so that said, ISNA is one of the 34 different national member organizations with a voice at the table on what the work looks like. And so our relationship with ISNA has shifted over various leadership roles at ISNA and different things like that, as there have been different executive directors over time. But always it's been a sort of a good working relationship with Shoulder to Shoulder maintaining some independence, which I think the independence piece has grown over time as Shoulder to Shoulder has become a more robust organization in and of itself.
Great. You mentioned at the top of our conversation that we're in the early days of Ramadan as we record this.
Yes.
And I know that Shoulder to Shoulder has had a robust Ramadan program over the past couple of years. That is, it is frustrated, as the rest of the Muslim community is, by the social distancing that's necessary. And so you've had to reimagine what you did. What was the original vision, and how are you doing it now?
Yeah. So over the last few years, we've done a couple of different campaigns over Ramadan. The big one is we've usually called it the United States of Love Over Hate. And it has been identifying and uplifting iftars around the United States. That's the fast breaking meal at the end of the day, each day during Ramadan. Iftars that are open to interfaith or guests of different faith backgrounds. And so those are not iftars that we have organized ourselves, but that we are in relationship or in conversation with the folks who are hosting them. And we publicize those on our website and send them out to people in our networks who are looking for this opportunity to engage their Muslim neighbors. And so last year we had over 520 of those around the United States in 38 states and a couple of Canadian territories. And we were really excited to grow it this year. We thought maybe we aim for 1,000. We moved from like 100 something the first year to over 500 the second year. We thought maybe we aim for 1,000, and then all of this hit and we had to rethink this. Additionally, last year we went on a Ramadan road trip where we helped helped organize a few, and then partnered with some iftars across the U.S. Southeast United States, and were able to work with the communities there on kind of bringing together unlikely partners in some of the cities where in others we just came alongside an already existing iftar that was happening, bringing together interfaith partners. And we did some video work at those, trying to tell some of the stories of the diversity of the American Muslim community, as well as the diversity of what interfaith engagement can look like. Because our trip to Raleigh, North Carolina looked really, really different in a backyard iftar than the one in Louisville, Kentucky, which was 600 people in a church. And so we were able to tell stories from that. And as luck would have it, our rollout plan for those videos was right before Ramadan this year. And in that way, we've been able to roll out some videos that let people engage those iftars and those experiences virtually in a certain way. But we also really wanted to offer an opportunity for people to connect, not just to watch something, but to really find ways to come together meaningfully this year. And that's been a big question for me as we've been kind of exploring what it looks like to pivot to this new space, because I think sometimes there's this tendency or desire to just move everything that we did in the real world online and let's just do it by Zoom and we'll do exactly what we were trying to do in the real world. We'll just do it virtually. And the reality is that just doesn't work for people. You can't always do exactly the same thing you were going to do in person virtually. And so I think we have to be creative and aware of those things, the reality that people get a little bit zoomed out and it can be hard to focus. If you're not directly engaged in a conversation like you and I are right now, you can lose focus if you're just watching a screen all the time. And so for our pivot for Ramadan this year, we designed a campaign called Welcome to My Table, where we're having Muslim and non-Muslim individuals and households signing up to be matched to each other. So we're matching them in groups of 2 or no more than 3 households, because we don't want way too many computer screens and confusion over who's talking and and that sort of thing. We want to really create something of an intimate experience where people are able to enter into dinner at one another's homes. And I think the Jewish community, of course, did much of this over Seders during Passover. And so I think it's something that faith communities are experimenting with internally across the country. And we wanted to do this to say that, interfaith engagement and the work of trying to engage across difference shouldn't be put to the side because of the crisis that we're living in. And at the same time, we need to think about doing it in a slightly different way. So we are running that campaign right now. We've had over 50 households sign up that we've partnered with each other, and we are excited to start hearing the stories of these iftars that people are holding in their homes.
And if people want to be in touch with you, what's the way they do it?
They can go to our website at ShouldertoShoulderCampaign.org and find all the information about our campaign. And there's also a contact us form on there that's easy to get in touch.
Remember to use the word campaign, not just shoulder to shoulder.
Correct. You will find some other organizations doing really great work that are not us. ShouldertoShoulderCampaign.org.
Catherine, I have 100 more questions to ask you, so we may just have to do this again. But unfortunately, we're at the end of our time now. So I want to thank you for being with us. Wish you well, especially with your babies, because I know that's a challenge at a time like this. And thanks.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jack.
And to all of you who are watching, stay home and stay focused.